Alright, what's going on everyone? The release of Lost Caverns of Ixalan is nearly upon us, and with it comes 4 new commander decks. The purpose of this video is to briefly go over the deck's core strategies so you can decide which deck is best for you. So all 4 decks are tribal decks featuring Ixalan's main tribes, those being vampires, dinosaurs, pirates, and merfolk. However, they do a pretty good job of being more than just tribal decks for the most part. So let's take a look at them. Let's start with Blood Rites, for example. This is the Orzhov Vampires deck with, I'm gonna butcher these names, but he's the first of the blessed, whoever he is, as the commander. It's a 3-mana 2/2 that says when you attack, target vampire that isn't a demon becomes a demon and gains when this creature dies, draw a card, and make a 4/3 vampire demon. That's pretty weird, right? We'll get to it in just a second, but the alternate commander is Carmen, Cruel Sky Marcher, which will get counters when things are sacrificed and can reanimate things from the graveyard. There's also a few other legendary vampire reprints that could technically be used as the commander, but these 2 are the ones that are exclusive to this deck. So the deck has plenty of tribal payoffs that you might expect, like Legion Lieutenant, Sanctum Seeker, and Radiant Destiny, all of which power up your vampires. But what's unique about this deck is it has a major sacrifice theme. It has many sacrifice outlets like Master of Dark Rites, Viscera Seer, and Bartholomew, this vampire. So the first sacks for mana, the Seer scries, and the third gets a counter, and it also has payoffs for sacrificing. There's some traditional sack payoffs you might be familiar with, like Blood Artist, Cruel Celebrant, and Falkenrath Noble, all of which drain when things are sacrificed, technically when they die, but you know, same thing. There's also vampire-specific things like your alternate commander and Olinda, which get counters, and Cordial Vampire, which distributes counters to all your vampires whenever one dies. But why would you want to sacrifice in a tribal deck? Normally, the whole point of a tribal deck is to go wide and then pump. Well, remember your commander. He turns vampires into demons, and then when they die, you draw a card, and you just make another vampire demon anyway. So there's lots of throwaway vampires that have abilities when they die, so you just pop these for an even bigger token and, you know, get some advantage. But remember that your commander basically upgrades tokens, like 1/1 vampire tokens. There's many ways to make these, and with your commander, you can basically turn them into a demon, sacrifice them, draw another card, and then replace them with a 4/3 vampire. So you can kind of upgrade your vampires by demonizing them, I guess. And this whole strategy is reinforced with a lot of the new cards in the deck, like Dusk Legion Sergeant, Olinda's Hierophant, and Promise of Aklazotz. The first gives all your vampires persist, which is great when you're sacrificing things. The Hierophant likes to be sacrificed and spits out a bunch of vampire tokens when it dies, which can then be demonized, as I guess I'm calling it. And the enchantment can sacrifice non-demons to populate. And you want to populate those 4/3 vampire demons you're making. So basically, if you want to play an Orzhov vampire deck where the whole idea is to convert them to demon vampires and sacrifice them for value in the process, be sure to check out Blood Rites. Like I said, some of these decks are pretty weird. This next one is pretty straightforward though, and that is Veloci-Ramp-Tor. This is the Naya deck, the dinosaur deck, with Pantlaza Sunfavored as the commander. It will let you discover X once per turn when another dinosaur enters, where X is its toughness, the creature's toughness. So Discover is basically like Cascade. If you were to play a 3 toughness dinosaur, you would reveal cards until you reveal something that costs 3 or less, and you get to cast it for free. The key difference with Discover is if you don't want to cast the card right away, you can put it into your hand, whereas Cascade forced you to play the card no matter what. So a key aspect of this deck is that this Discover mechanic is not based on the mana cost of the spell, right? Cascade, you cascade based on the mana value of the thing with Cascade, but in this case it's the toughness of the dinosaur. So there are some low cost, high toughness creatures in the deck to potentially get some high mana value cards for cheap, including the alternate commander for the deck. She's a 3 mana 5 toughness creature, and she can also force any 2 creatures to fight. Not only does this allow you to make your big dinosaurs fight your opponent's smaller creatures, it's great card advantage, right? You just constantly get to pick off creatures, but it also allows you to make your own creatures fight, and it even costs less to activate if you make your own things fight, which might sound weird. Why would you want to do that? But remember that dinosaurs have the enrage mechanic, which triggers when they take damage, and many of the dinosaurs have higher toughness than power, so basically you make 2 dinosaurs fight to trigger their enrage mechanic. There's even wrathful raptors, which says whenever a dinosaur you control is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target that isn't a dinosaur. So if you make 2 dinosaurs fight, that damage is then going to be reflected to other creatures, which is kind of cool. So the deck is filled with some typical ramp cards you might expect. You get things like Drover of the Mighty, Odapek, Huntmaster, Azokan, Seer, all of which make casting dinosaurs easier by either adding mana or making them cheaper. There's also some new stuff like Ixali's Lorekeeper, Progenitor's Icon, and Topiary Stomper. Okay, that last one isn't new to the set, but it's new-ish. But the mana rock is interesting because it allows you to cast dinosaurs at instant speed. This is on a 3 mana rock, which aren't very exciting, but what's interesting about this is not only does it allow you to ambush block, it makes you scary to attack into, but it also allows you to trigger your commander's discover ability on other people's turns. Remember, it only triggers once per turn. Another key aspect of this deck is actually card advantage. You wouldn't expect that from dinosaurs, but both commanders are great at generating card advantage, and this continues with things like Runic Armosaur, Curious Altosaur, and Ripjaw Raptor, all of which draw cards repeatedly, and it continues at the top end as well with things like Earthshaker, Dreadmaw, Atali, Regal Behemoth. The first draws a card for each dinosaur you control. Atali just gets to rip free spells off the top of people's libraries, and the Behemoth makes you the Monarch, and it even doubles your mana when you have the Crown. There's also some interesting new cards for this tribe, like Dinosaur Egg, From the Rubble, and Scion of Calamity. The first has Evolve, so it's going to get bigger and bigger the more creatures you cast, and then it discovers for a huge amount when it dies. The Rubble lets you reanimate a dinosaur every turn, definitely a Jurassic Park thing there, and Scion of Calamity has Myriad, so you get a bunch of copies of it, and then they all blow up artifacts and enchantments when they hit players. But yeah, I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. If you like dinosaurs, check out Veloci-Ramp-Tor. I feel like anyone who's interested in this one probably already knew that before watching the video, but I'm glad you watched regardless. Thank you. Next up is Ahoy Mateys, which is the Merfolk deck. Oh, okay, look, it's the pirate deck with Admiral Brass Unsinkable as the commander. She's a 5 mana 3/3 that mills 4 cards when she enters, and at the beginning of combat, you can return a pirate from the graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it, which basically means it gets exiled if it dies. It also becomes a 4/4 with haste. We'll get into the specifics in a bit, but this is indeed an undead pirate reanimator deck, so there's that. The alternate commander is Don Andres, the Renegade, which says each creature you control but don't own gets +2/+2, Menace, and Death Touch, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell you don't own, you make 2 treasures. So this is all about casting your opponent's stuff and stealing their creatures. If you wanted a commander for that, here it is. So anyway, undead pirates, your commander reanimates things, and this continues with things like Skeleton Crew, the Grim Captain's Locker, and the Indomitable. Skeleton Crew is a new lord for both pirates and skeletons. You could just put this in a skeleton deck if you wanted. And whenever you reanimate a pirate, it makes a 2/2 pirate skeleton token. So the more you reanimate, the more creatures you get, and it's a lord, it's pumping them all up. It can also endlessly return from the graveyard for 6 mana. The artifact surveils to help fill your graveyard with pirates, and can give them all escape as an extra way to reanimate. And the Indomitable is a pirate ship that can be cast from the graveyard if you control 3 pirates. It's also a 4 mana 6/6 that will draw a card whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player. There's also lots of tribal support like you would expect. You get things like Vanquisher's Banner, Corsair Captain, Admiral Beckett Brass. The first pumps pirates and lets you dig for more. The captain pumps pirates and makes a treasure when it enters. And the admiral will let you steal your opponent's non-land permanents if you hit them with enough creatures. And these last two both emphasize the other 2 themes of the deck, which is treasures and casting your opponent's stuff. So you get cards like Breaches, Hostage Taker, Ramirez, which let you cast your opponent's cards. Breaches and Ramirez both exile the top cards of your opponent's libraries when you hit them with creatures, and then you can cast them, and Hostage Taker will first exile a creature, and then you can choose to cast it to your side if you want, and this is pretty common in the deck. There's lots of ways to either cast your opponent's spells or steal their creatures, but this can be pretty mana intensive, right? So in order to pay for it, we have treasures. Enterprising Scallywag, Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator, and Jim Cutter Buccaneer all make a lot of them. The Scallywag does so every turn you descend. The Navigator makes a treasure for each opponent that gets hit with a creature in combat every turn, and it has flying, so that helps trigger it. And the Buccaneer makes a treasure every time a pirate enters, and can also turn those treasures into weapons if you want. It turns it into equipment, so that's kind of cool. So the idea is you're going to make treasures, you're going to use treasures to cast your opponent's stuff, and also you're going to reanimate pirates from the graveyard. So if that sounds fun, if undead, treasure producing, spell stealing pirates sound fun to you, be sure to check out Ahoy Mateys. Our final deck is Explorers of the Deep, which is the actual Merfolk deck, with Hackball of the Surging Soul as the commander. It's a 4-mana 3/3 that says at the beginning of combat, each Merfolk you control explores, which means you reveal the top card. If it's a land, you put it into your hand. If it's not, you get a counter, and then you can choose to put it back or put it into your graveyard. So what you can do, once you find a non-land, you can choose to just keep putting it back on top, revealing it, putting it back on top, revealing it, to just put counters on all your stuff. Or you can dig for better stuff if you want, either way. And remember, this triggers for every Merfolk. So this can net a ton of lands, it can get a ton of counters, it can filter a whole bunch, and the commander also lets you play extra lands when it attacks, or draw even more cards. The alternate commander is, I believe it's pronounced Zolotyak, though sorry if that's incorrect, the Smiling Flood, which when it enters the battlefield or attacks will put a flood counter on target land, which will turn it into an island in addition to its other types. Then at the end of turn, it untaps everything you control with a counter on it. Not only does this untap your lands with flood counters on them, but this deck has a +1/+1 counters theme, so it's going to untap all your creatures with +1 counters, which will likely be most of them. Should also be noted that there are several Simic commanders in this deck if you wanted to use them. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, there's probably close to 10, but those are the two unique to the deck. So this deck cares about exploring, finding lands, and spreading +1/+1 counters. So it has stuff like Deeproot Elite, Metallic Mimic, and Merfolk Skydiver. The first two are going to add counters when Merfolk enter, and the Skydiver proliferates, so you can double your counters every time you activate it, and doubling counters is an important aspect of the deck as well, because there's Hardened Scales and Branching Evolution and Voral. The first two add extra counters when counters are placed, and Voral can double the number of counters on target permanent. There's also ways to make things with counters become more powerful, like Herald of Secret Streams, which makes things unblockable. Tributary Instructor will draw cards when things with counters die, and Zagana gives things with counters trample. There's even stuff like Wave Goodbye, the name of this is quite silly, but Ripples of Potential, and Simic Ascendancy as well. So the first bounces everything that doesn't have a counter, most of your stuff will. The Ripples will proliferate, then phase out all of our stuff to protect them, and Simic Ascendancy not only distributes counters, but is an alternate win condition if you get 20 counters on it. And all of these counters pump our board, in addition to traditional lords like Master of the Pearl Trident, Merfolk Mistbinder, Merfolk Sovereign, and Marrow Regery, and Mistdancer, which is a new one that grants flying, so that's fun. There's even cards that help with exploring, whether it's doubling exploring or allowing you to play lands when you explore. Like if you explore and see a land, there's cards that will just say, yeah, you can just play that card, so that's pretty good. There's also things like Tadiova, which will draw even more cards. In fact, this is the type of deck that you might regularly find yourself with more cards in hand than your library. So yeah, if that sounds fun to you, if lots of counters and lots of doubling and lots of drawing and lots of exploring and tribal merfolk, if that sounds fun, be sure to check out Explorers of the Deep. And that's it for the Caverns of Ixalan commander decks. I will leave sponsored Amazon affiliate links in the description below, and as always, I will strongly encourage you to buy these at your local game store instead if you have one in your area. I'll also leave links to the complete deck list if you want to look them over, but in the meantime, thanks for watching, I hope this was useful, and I will see you in the next one.